It isn't.
This is not a show and might not even be a connection. Here's Judah and guest.
Well, it's not a show. It's definitely a conversation. Today, I am talking with the one and only Joshua Blackburn, Captain Joshua Blackburn. How are you doing today?
Arr. I should get my pirate hat out.
Today, are you going to keep your little microphone from scraping all over your collar?
I don't know.
I like it better when you dress down.
When I dress down?
That is going to be a topic soon. I've been thinking about that topic.
Yeah.
Of uniforms and how we dress and our theology and our philosophy surrounding that.
Ooh. Or I think even broader. I mean, just like how is clothing a symbol? Anyway.
Well, I mean, yeah, okay.
We'll talk about this sometime.
But today we are going to talk about church and church theology. We've talked about it once before. We've sort of in a broad way, but we're going to try to get a little more specific today. And because you come from a very liturgical tradition, the Orthodox tradition, and
yeah. Well, and I would just say that historically, that Christianity has been a liturgical faith.
Yeah, and so for those that haven't heard the term liturgicals, would you say it's a word we put to the practices of? It could be practices of anything, right? It's the things we do regularly and we put into motion what we believe, right? So it's the practice of what we believe.
One could take a broader, like kind of like clothing, and broadening it out to like, how is clothing symbolic? That term liturgy, I think, yes, is sometimes appropriated to replace the word ritual.
Okay. So is it like, so ritual's pejorative and
I don't think so, because
Okay.
like, I mean, like in marriage counseling, like having rituals of connection, like habitual practices where we reconnect with our partner at the start of the day, at the close of the day, when people come home from work, at various periods of the day. I mean, that's just simply an intentional practice. And oftentimes with like a lot of rituals, there is some correlation with time or the calendar or the day.
Intentionality, it necessitates belief, right? Because nobody is intentional for no reason at all, right?
It does. It certainly is going to imply belief, and it's certainly going to imply a purpose. So, but historically, the term liturgy is referring to, the Eucharist, the worship service that culminates in communion. Like in the Orthodox tradition, like the Sunday service, but it's also served every day in monasteries and other places, is just simply the divine liturgy. In liturgy being the work of the people. And that, I think, is a really important distinction between Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy. In Roman Catholicism, a priest or a bishop could, I don't know if they do it anymore after Vatican II, but in theory, they could celebrate or perform the liturgy all by themselves. That is not the case in Orthodoxy.
Oh.
A minister cannot perform the liturgy by themselves.
Right, because that's a foundational tenet of the Orthodox tradition.
That's a rule. That is
communal, right? Being is communion.
Yeah. Well, being is communion, and communion
is,
and the bishop is never separated from the body of Christ. The priest, the presbyter, is never separated from the body of Christ. That's not, and and not in the Eucharistic sense, but in the physical church sense, like the people. Um,
So, how does that work out during COVID? How have you guys worked that out during COVID? Because so recently, okay, I'll back up a little bit and say recently, I heard one of a scathing, not scathing, well, yeah, scathing critique of the church in I already forget his name in L.A. in not L.A. In California. What's his name? The pastor, sort of arrogant pastor that sent the letter saying we're going back to church and the government can stick it.
I'm not familiar, though. I know that there have been Orthodox bishops that have written
okay,
similar. I wouldn't say arrogant, but rather pointed.
Yeah.
Letters in California because they were trying to ban, assemblies and churches, or maybe have. I don't live in California, so I don't keep up.
Yeah.
That this is essentially this is an essential part of our faith, like coming together
Mm-hmm.
in this way.
Yeah.
To do these things
Right.
is an essential part of our religious faith, and that to deny that is overstepping the government's bounds and pushing into the realm of making religious rules.
Well, so the critique of that I thought was a decent critique was that this particular pastor, I have a difficult time using my brain. His name MacArthur,
John MacArthur.
John MacArthur.
Okay.
The critique of MacArthur, because he sent essentially saying, we have done the quarantine, and we feel like that we have submitted, but now we believe that it's been, we have to. Same thing your priests were saying, except the critique was that the ecclesiology was wrong because everything surrounds MacArthur. They can't meet outside of MacArthur. Now, from an Orthodox perspective, there's nothing wrong with that. It seems, well, except that he's not a priest.
We don't need John MacArthur.
No, you don't need John. But you do need your priest.
Well, wherever the bishop is, there's a church,
Bishop.
right? I mean,
Bishop.
so and within Orthodox ecclesiology, everything centers around the local bishop, and that's been. And I don't care if you're an Anglican, you're Roman Catholic, or Orthodox. Within those historic, Episcopal approaches to ecclesiology, the bishop is the local center of the church. Now, the bishop can delegate functions out. So like my bishop lives in Atlanta. In a more established Orthodox country, there probably would be a bishop in Bristol or a bishop in Johnson City or a bishop in Knoxville. However, that's not the case. So the closest bishop is in Atlanta, Bishop Alexios. And but he delegates out. The priests essentially are delegated ministerial functions underneath the bishop. And going back to if communion is like the epicenter of worship, the climax of worship, that's not something that you can do virtually. If the church is a Eucharistic community, then ultimately that's going to culminate in bread and wine. It's going to culminate in eating. It's going to culminate in something that, yes, again, it's just 3 songs and a sermon ain't going to cut it. In that way of looking at things, so that way of doing things, that reality. So yeah, that I don't know much about what MacArthur wrote, but I did read. There was a letter from one of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia bishops, I think he's probably out of San Francisco in the Western
Yeah.
Diocese, wrote a rather
Scathing.
I wouldn't say scathing, but strong.
Okay. I'd like
Strongly,
to. What was his
strongly.
What was his name? I'd like to look that up.
I mean, I can't remember who's the bishop out there, but it was strongly worded. It was basically kind of like,
What kind of Orthodox
you know,
are you? Come on, dude. Got to know all
yeah,
your bishops.
well, there's lots of bishops,
Yeah.
and they're all over on the West Coast. But
Where
no, it
was
was
it?
very strongly.
From where?
I think he's out of San Francisco. It's a Western Diocese of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. Yeah, but in a nutshell, it's kind of like, we escaped this awful place called communist Russia, and we came to America, and it was great. And we have this, free exercise of religion, and now you're pulling out the rug from us,
Yeah.
So please don't do that.
Well, and I think that it's I see it as, so I had a friend that took the quarantine super seriously. His wife has MS, and
Okay.
so he took it super seriously at first. He took it super seriously for 4 months, and he said, the way I look at it, quarantine's 4 months. It's not forever. I don't see any delineation or strictures that gives us any kind of idea of when this will end. Any kind of plan. So what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And he went from probably the person who took it the most serious, like the person I know that took it the most serious, to more like me, who doesn't take it serious at all.
And I mean, from our end of things, like basically the diocese, our bishop has laid down rules about how we're going to do things, and in a hierarchical church, it makes it really simple. It's kind of like, well, Bishop Alexios has said this is what we're going to do, so this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. Well, and that puts much more of an onus on him, right?
Right. I mean, that puts a lot of pressure and responsibility. My big thing about authority, and why I don't want any, is because with authority comes responsibility. And frankly, I've got enough things on my plate I'm responsible for. I don't need any more. So no, I mean, so I mean, like I mentioned before we got on, I'm like, the rule right now is like, we're still holding services. They're just socially distanced as far as numbers inside the building, and everyone wears masks, and they take your temperature when you come in, and you wipe off your hand. Don't touch anybody. Hit the hand sanitizer. Keep everything clean.
Not allowed to sneeze in people's faces. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you guys allowed to sing?
Yes, I suppose. Yeah, I can't remember there being any non-singing rules, but everyone's wearing masks, and I think that's the thing that's funny about masks is a lot of the arguments are, this doesn't protect me, and it's like, well, that's not the point. The point is to keep you from spewing your droplets everywhere. So you're just protecting other people a little bit. I mean, within reason. It's not foolproof. It's not absolute, but it's certainly. I mean, I was singing at church inside my little mask, and putting my glasses down a little bit farther on my nose so they don't fog up, and it was all good.
Yeah, but how long? Like, if COVID continues for another year, will you guys continue just to wear masks during church?
I think that's a possibility. Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, as a reasonable precaution, I'm not opposed to that. I mean, it's not like I'm, I can understand, coming up with some other accommodation for people that mask wearing might be problematic in a sense, but it doesn't bother me, and doesn't seem to bother my wife or my 4 kids.
Well, masks are very different. What we've talked about, but we'll talk about it again. What I want to get down to is get down to the. I really want to hear your perspective on, because I'm sort of in a weird spot where I'm coming back home, I'm coming from a more liturgy oriented church where I learned about the importance of liturgy. And now coming back to more of a home church,
Mm-hmm.
more relaxed liturgy, still intentional, of course, but I don't know. It's a weird time to be doing that during COVID, because there is an extra liturgy in churches now, if they meet at all. There's the liturgy of the masks and the social distancing, the things you already uh, expressed.
Some face to face, with mess.
Yeah.
Um,
But so I guess the difficulty is for places that have banned church,
mm-hmm.
um,
Like public worship. They basically,
public worship.
they stopped coming together as a body.
Or even churches that have decided to stop coming together. There seems like there's something wrong with that. Now, I understand it for time, for safety.
Yeah.
But for how long? How long can you go without the sacrament of church, sacrament of the Eucharist? Now, I guess you could take we did a little Eucharist over Zoom, but as you said,
the Zoom Eucharist.
It
finds
wanting.
No. No, that being said, I mean, I think there is an aspect of being able to worship, to pray together virtually, right?
Yeah.
It's not the same, but there's an aspect of coming together and praying. To use an old Greek term, like is synaxis, the coming together, and that's an important part of the life in Christ, is this coming together, right? I mean, and I think to a certain degree, like, can we do that virtually? Yeah, I think so.
Should
ooh, that's an S word. Why you got to shit on me, man? I don't think within scripture nor in church tradition are there really hard and fast rules on that. There are, I mean, normatively, yes, but this is a little bit of an extraordinary time, and there have been extraordinary times in the past, or for that matter, extraordinary persons that abstaining from the synaxis is not a inappropriate thing. Generally speaking, for most people, under most circumstances, the synaxis is important. From a Eucharistic perspective, obviously that can't be done virtually. That's just.
Now, some people believe you can do that virtually.
Somehow. Okay. Okay. Taste and see. That's all I can say. Next time you tell me about a virtual baptism, I'll check in on that. I don't want to argue with anybody, but that sounds nonsensical.
It did to me too, but extraordinary times call for extraordinary situations. I think my difficulty is that it just seems I appreciate the leadership like MacArthur that steps up and says, enough's enough. Okay, we've done this. We feel like where we are, it's safer. We are going back to what feeds our soul. And and if it's a little risky, it's a little risky.
Well, as we talked before, it begs the question about what's essential. Home Depot is essential, but the church is not. But talking about ecclesiology, I mean, and how our understanding of the church affects normal life. I think one of the things when I was listening to you, and I know we were talking about like home church and small groups, from a historical perspective, I think one thing that might shed a little bit of light is this distinction, yet not separation, between the idea of, or I should say idea, that's not right, the concept of the domestic church.
Say more.
So in American Christianity and in Western Christianity in particular, and more broadly, we tend to think of things in rather individualistic terms. However, that's just not the way tradition or scripture looks at life.
Right.
When I know at one point we talked about Abraham. When Abraham left, he took the whole family with him.
Yeah.
Right. The Passover, the blood goes on the lintel, and everyone in the house is saved. Okay. You we'll just fast forward real quick to the book of Acts just for fun. And there's a very specific and common phrase in the book of Acts, like believe and be baptized, and you and your household will be saved. Okay. So this concept of the domestic church, the micro ecclesia, the small church. And so, I think there is a place for small groups and in liturgy, as far as like regular family worship within the home, right? Like the continuation of coming together and praying. But my struggle is we shouldn't confuse that for the mega ecclesia, the great church, and which is for us here on earth really embodied and made manifest in a local congregation. Because the true great church includes not just everyone living, but everyone who's gone on, and one could maybe even argue those yet to be born. But it's bigger. And
I think that there could be a danger. I see a dangerous spot where people are saying, we want to get back to church, not because of the sacred gathering, the magical thing that happens. And by magical, I mean sacred.
Yes. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. But because I miss my friends and I want the social aspect. Now the social aspect I think is important, but I think it's missing the point of liturgy.
It's a part of it though. People just don't leave when the liturgy's over.
That's true.
No one ever just leaves. Some people do.
Some people do.
Some people do. But there's this aspect of the flip side to communion being fellowship. And again, I'm just going to use that word again. Traditionally, there are meals that follow worship.
Absolutely.
It's kind of in modern times, it's kind of been chinced down into like coffee hour, and coffee hour is good. I'm not dissing coffee hour. If anyone's listening and they're like, coffee hour is awesome, it is. But traditionally, it often like flowed into a meal, and in fact, some churches, and I like in particular, I'm thinking like some of the Russian churches that I've been to, like it literally ends in when the event comes to a close, it's at the end of a sit down meal.
Well, the table can mean so the table as an extension of the table. The broader table, the more generalized table. It's something actually that Dave Fitch, or Pastor Dave, or Reverend Dave Fitch, pointed out. It is the thing that we do as people more than anything else together, and that is eating, eating and drinking.
Yes.
We do not, well, we do other things, but not together, hopefully, defecation. Right? But the thing that is most regular in the human life that we can do together in a
It is
appropriate
eating.
manner is eating.
Yes, absolutely.
And,
Yeah.
and it's the significance. There's a power in the table, both in the Eucharist and in the social, more generalized table. And I feel like it's hard for me to see. Okay, so I guess one of the biggest problems for me is I don't see the danger of COVID like everybody else does.
Okay.
I just don't.
Since you've already had it and everything.
Well, that might be a big part of it. Yeah,
That could be an influencing
that could be an influencing factor. The other thing, though, is just looking. I mean, I don't know. It's just these little things, like the fact that we have 40 to 60,000 deaths per year from the flu with a vaccine. It's not like a vaccine is going to suddenly take away all the deaths.
It's not.
We have 1 million deaths a day, million deaths a year from pneumonia. At the very least, I was looking for 40,000 deaths a week last year from pneumonia. No, 4,000. Sorry, that was way too high. 4,000 deaths here in America. 4,000 deaths a week. And now I know this is a very specific kind of death. It's a very contagious. I've experienced how contagious it's amazing.
It spreads quickly.
It spreads very quickly. And I just feel like it's also new and scary because it's new, and there's a lot of and I just feel like you take the novelty away, and it's just another thing and another risk that we have to take as human beings.
Just factor it into the cost of living.
I think people are under the illusion that we can stop, and maybe I'm very prone to illusions, but when I hear my wife say, like, my wife is not prone to illusions, and her say, like, everybody's gonna get this. We can't stop it.
No, I don't think you can stop it. I think there are some things that we might be able to do to slow it down. Like when everyone went on lockdown, like that slowed it.
Well, did it postpone it?
Well, postpone and slow, I don't think are too far apart. I think the struggle is just, like, at least this has been my experience. My expectations, based on what I knew at the time, was that this thing would really kind of hit the brakes in the summer. That generally speaking, like most flu-like viruses, it would slow down just naturally. Well, at least in Tennessee, I can tell you this: that ain't what happened. It didn't even come close. It just got worse. And we here in Tennessee, we're just we're freedom loving people, and we just like to share. And there's been a lot of sharing going on, and I mean, and this is the thing. Like when we were all quarantined, I was not really hearing like local human interest stories, like people, kind of like the Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation from COVID kind of stuff. Well, in the last month, those stories started to get pretty real. When it's like, I'm 1 degree removed from somebody that died.
Yeah.
I mean, that'll slow you down.
But you've been 1 degree removed from people that died before.
That's also now I do sort of embrace that. Like that is also true.
Now, it may be more prevalent now, Or it may be it has a huge magnifying glass on it. I mean, I've heard like
it does. I mean, I guess my struggle is like I had a former neighbor. I guess there would be one. Like his buddy from vet school, 41 years old. My mother-in-law had a long time family friend, and that got her attention. I mean, as far as like what she's doing now, we're not bunkered down quarantine here at the house, but on the other hand, we're somewhat circumspect about what we do. I mean, we're kind of going on with life as usual, sort of. Like there are certainly some rules at church. Normally, like Latasha and I like to walk downtown, and we've got plenty of breweries and places to have a beer and relax and talk with one another. But frankly, I'm not doing that right now because the people around here are plumb crazy.
Well, how long, or when would you start doing that again?
When the general numbers of infected people go down significantly. They've gone up significantly this summer, like creeping into the summer. I mean, they're rising to the point where I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, schools were like, "Yep, we're going to reopen," and now they're like, "Yeah, we'll be doing online."
But don't they have to go up? Like, if these numbers were inevitable, say they had gone up during the beginning, instead of quarantining, these deaths, these cases, the exact same that happened now, happened then, the likelihood is that we would have
been on the back. Yeah, we could be on. Yeah, if what's happening now had happened then, is it possible we could be on the backside of it? Maybe. However, I'm not sure if I can agree that like, as I understand it, just from basic virus kind of stuff, like this stuff is mediated by human behavior. So, for instance, like my wife and I were talking about it earlier tonight. Like the rates in Kentucky are significantly lower than Tennessee, and that's been largely mediated by just how people are acting. Their governor took different approaches than Tennessee's governor early on.
Same thing with Illinois, Chicago. But the difficulty is that was the way it was with Florida too. And then they opened up, as inevitably everybody has to.
That's true. I mean, everyone has to inevitably open up, but I do think there are some cultural differences in how people approach things. Like when we drive around here in Bristol, it's kind of like, we live in a part of the country where mask wearing is not a very popular thing.
I bet.
And so needless to say, where mask wearing is not very prevalent, we just don't go there. However, there have been like businesses that have enforced, like, if you're coming to our grocery store, you're wearing a mask, and if you don't have one, we'll give you one. I've had to do it with our counseling practice, where I'm like, you know what? When the health department says you have to wear a mask, this is what I told the clinicians. I don't care what you think about COVID. When the county health department says you have to wear one, they've created a best practice standard. And if you violate that best practice standard, you open yourself up to liability.
Yeah.
And frankly,
I get that.
Yeah. I don't want it. I don't want the liability.
Right.
My job is to protect the owner of the business from that kind of liability. And you, as clinicians, I like you. Whether or not you get sick or not, I don't know. Frankly, it can happen whether you wear a mask or not. But we're going to wear masks, and we're going to ask clients to wear masks. So, if we see each other face to face, and we still are.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you still have a lot of in-office clients?
Oh yeah.
Wow. And are they on the rise, or have they stayed pretty even?
It kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. Like I've got a therapist down in Knoxville that's seeing folks face to face, but he's had clients call in and be like, I want to flip over to telehealth. I don't want to take the risk. Okay, cool. We got computers. It's great. No problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have Jim Pass. Jim Pass,
Jim.
old friend. Thank you for tuning in. He's went to high school with my father, and so Jim says, guys, life by its very definition is not static. Commerce, capitalism is by their very nature not static. One cannot stay home indefinitely. Isolation does not present a cure. I think that's sort of
Absolutely.
now. There is a good argument for staying in isolation until we have a cure. I can kind of I thought the original argument was staying in isolation till summer because summer would be a cure. That made sense to me.
That was the kind of, I think, back in like March, April, that was kind of the prevailing wisdom. Like, we'll hunker down, it'll get hot, and generally speaking, these viruses don't do well in that environment.
Well, so I talked to Jay Nass about that, and what we sort of talked about. I brought up that article that talked about the modern convenience of the air conditioner and how we are a society now, and it's true. I've seen a huge difference between just 5 years ago when I could go around wearing a sweatshirt if I wanted now, because I very rarely there's just such good air conditioning in the house, in the car. There's very little opening of the windows and having outside type stuff now, especially in the kind of heat that we've been experiencing this summer, particularly in the states that are seeing a lot of the spikes in cases, like Arizona and Texas and Florida. People are staying inside just as much as they would if it was Christmas time.
They are, and I think, at least I know in Tennessee, I think that's what's kind of fueled some of our rise in cases. Is people go to the restaurants, people go into bars, people go into Dollywood. Sevier County, for instance. No, Sevier County went like off the charts back in right before Memorial Day.
Got pretty severe.
It was in the top 10 per capita.
Wow.
Not people visiting. That's just people that like live and work in Sevier County.
But see, it's also a vicious cycle. When people are afraid of going out and used to being in quarantine, it's even more so. It's even less because most people are, from what I've seen in the data, like looking at the 66% from New York, looking at how China stopped. They really stopped by keeping people from going home, and it's really at home where the virus is spreading.
Interesting.
So maybe restaurants is a place, but it's pretty aired out and ventilated. But it's going home in small houses.
They're picking it up somewhere and they're taking it home. I mean, like, I know up here, like, I know early on somebody I knew flipped out because, some itinerant, we'll call them itinerant farm workers. There were 21 itinerant farm workers who contracted COVID. They worked on a strawberry farm.
Oh yeah.
And like, that's a great example of people that live in close proximity. They're in small spaces for extended period of time
with a lot of people in the house.
My thing about Sevierville is, like, somehow or another, like, they were picking it up and they were taking it home.
Yeah, because that's how they stopped it in China. Is if they, first of all, they had like just an awesome way of testing. It wasn't this little swabbity dob, but it was on the spot. They would, if you had a fever, took you to the fever tents. If you went to the fever tents, you got your blood tested and CT scan of your lungs. So they knew if you had it. They knew. They weren't waiting 3 days for.
They were like, you've got it. You go over here in this special place.
Yeah, and now that would never fly. Well, I don't know. Actually, I don't know what would fly now in America, but in there and in South Korea, they would quarantine them for 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Let's take it seriously.
From their family, from their work, from everywhere.
That makes sense. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. If that would be the way to stop it. Now, you have to stop it though. Because if it gets back in, all the people that didn't get it, and this is what I'm talking about, the inevitable, unless you have some kind of cure, which even a vaccine is not a cure. It's barely 50%.
It's a vaccine for a specific strain.
Yeah.
For a virus that, well, probably has a propensity to mutate.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to run its course in some way, shape, or form.
The people that don't get it are vulnerable forever.
Oh, yeah.
Because even like places like Japan that did a really good job of bringing cases way down, deaths way down right now. I mean, they had to open up. Eventually, you have to live, right?
That's also inevitable.
So if you don't, if summer would have been, if summer had worked, that would have, oh, summer, where art thou? But now that summer is not something that is a big help.
It's gone. I finally owned up to the fact that I had this Pollyannish vision based on the limited amount of information I had.
Me too.
That that we'd get a breath of fresh air for the summer, and I figured, okay, I can start making some plans for the fall, and we'll kind of get some things in order. And within a very short period of time, it was like, well, that dream just died, and I better get on the ball and make sure we've got everything in order so we're covered.
Yeah. Well, and so church, if it is something that we need, look, I'm saying if going to church is something that we need, I'm not necessarily saying it is. You believe it is. Others. So if someone says we need the liturgy of the church, we need the sacred gathering of the church, then we need it. And we need it even if there's COVID. There's worse things than COVID. So
there is a very pithy statement right there. There are worse things than COVID.
Yeah, I mean, suicide is going up astronomically. Children, high schoolers, homicides up in every major city, up like 100%. It's like more than that in Chicago.
Really?
Yeah.
Even in Chicagoland.
Yeah.
Which is
where it was already high.
Which is a pretty rough town.
Yeah, we've already lost 5 of our BAM students this summer. Yeah, are becoming a man. I was part of the Becoming a Man program.
Yeah,
we've lost 5 of them, which may seem small number, but I mean that's a big number in 2 or 3 months. It's a lot of our guys.
Like how many people are in that program? How many young men were in that program?
Program? They're about I think they're over 1,000, 2,000.
Still, I mean,
these are people. So it makes a big difference to the guys that sat in the circle with them, like these are just like nameless. Oh, people die,
They're not a statistic, right? I mean, yeah. Wow.
These are guys that we've sat with and we've worked on. We finally got them out of certain struggles, and it's just sad. It's just, but all that to say, there are worse things than COVID, and if church is important, then church is important, and we need to fight for church if it is important. I believe that we should be submissive to our government to a certain extent. That come on, I'm a Republican, but
I can buy into that statement.
But to a certain extent. There's just a certain point in which if church is important, if we need it, and I'm not just talking about like a vague definition of church, like, well, if we're getting together, we're singing. We're getting together and we're praying. Like, I'm talking about a more formative thing, something where something different happens than just getting together, singing
Yeah.
songs, praying.
And the difficult part there is what you just described represents within the United States a rather small number of believers. Not to mention like the general tenor of the culture at large. Like we don't live in a sacramental culture. We don't live in a very how would I say this, a God facing culture. So and when I say that, like liturgically, and this is true, you know, in the Orthodox world and the Roman Catholic world, the Anglican world, minus maybe some like Roman Catholic traditionalists, like everyone is facing Godward.
Hmm.
Everyone.
Hmm.
That's not the case in Protestantism. There's somebody looking back at you, right? You know, no. During periods of the service, there's preaching, and that's an inward. Here, I'm going to do it this way.
Yeah.
But for the bulk of the liturgy, it's Godward.
That's interesting.
The priest's back is to everyone.
Yeah.
The deacon's back is to everyone.
And everyone is facing God.
And everyone is facing Godward.
Wow, that is actually pretty important for me to hear, as I have become quite accustomed to meeting in the round and facing each other, which there's a theology associated with that, the communion of the saints.
There's certainly I think a place and a time for that. Right? I mean, it's not either or. I think there's room for both and.
Interesting. Everyone is facing Godward. Everyone, even the priest, his face is looking, symbolically towards God.
Symbolically.
Yeah. Well, that's some important things. Oh, so Jim Pass says, church, yes or no? Where else does the average person receive biblical instruction? I think that's something that came up earlier when we were talking about, like, I think it's good to meet as a family. You were talking, you used a fancy word to talk about the small gatherings.
Yeah, like the small church, the micro ecclesia.
The micro
ecclesia. Yeah. That's St. John Chrysostom. Like I didn't come up with that, man. That's like the domestic church. That's you know.
Yeah, the micro ecclesia and the mega ecclesia.
Or is it the mega, the great church.
Because the mega is important in the shaping of the micro ecclesia.
And they're intertwined, you know. And I think where the confusion can be is people think that you can just be a part of, and it's a struggle. I'm just going to throw this out here, like, you know, like worshiping as a family on a regular basis is a struggle. But those things all work together. They're not. It's both and. You really you can't really have. I suppose in theory you can have one without the other, but in reality you can't have one without the other. Well,
that's good. It's something that there's two things. I sort of broke something in my brain, is the idea of the importance of the shaping of the mega ecclesia and also the God facing. That will make it a lot easier for me to go to a church with pews.
a church with pews, yes.
I've been
unless you want to become, you know, not a shaker, but a
Quaker.
Friend. A Quaker. Thank you. Quaker.
I do want to become a Quaker. I do. But you know, except for all the not using technology stuff.
Well, modern friends don't do that. You know?
They don't?
No. In fact, there's a lot of Quakers in North Carolina.
Really? I gotta look into that. Have you ever been you've been in a lot of denominations. Have you ever been in a
No,
Quaker?
I've never visited a Quaker meeting.
Never even visited. Wow.
No, I've never had the opportunity.
Wow. I'm gonna look for the opportunity. I like it. What our former church was heavily influenced by the Mennonite tradition. Similar. But the Quaker, well, anyways, that gets into a different. That would be an interesting to talk about. But next week we're going to talk about the liturgy of attire.
Attire. Clothing.
Clothing.
How I cover our nakedness.
Yeah. But in the meantime, we're trying to end a little early, trying to get to that half an hour mark. We have to work on our liturgy.
We're working on it.
Unless anybody has a comment you want to post before we say our adieus to you and yous, I think that it's just been a helpful conversation for me. I always appreciate your circumspect perspective. Without derision or contention, you are able to help me sort of see another perspective, and I appreciate that, Josh. Thank you.
Always happy to be a mirror and a new perspective giver.
Hey, I love it. Well, for everybody who's tuned in, thank you very much. Jim, thank you so much
Thank you, Jim,
for leaving comments and being part of the conversation. Jim says adieu.
Adieu. Farewell and adieu.